everyone. This is Scott Duffy from softwarearchitect.ca, and I just started up the live stream here to talk about the new set of exams that were announced last week. The first one I want to talk about is AZ-100. This is Microsoft Azure Infrastructure and Deployment. Now, what Microsoft seems to have done is they're splitting up the 70-533 exam, which I guess it's been out for 4 years, but they keep revising it, so it's sort of been updated. Look how big this exam is getting. There's now 8 major topics covered in the 70-533 exam. As an instructor myself, I have a course on Udemy and on other places on my own site as well, but on Udemy, I'll say my 70-533 exam is now 10 hours of on-demand video, and it's always a challenge to keep it updated. But I think Microsoft's thinking that this exam is starting to get out of hand here. Now, just give me a second. I'm all right. Looks like I'm streaming. Hello, everyone. Feel free to ask questions and comment during. I'm not a pro live streamer. I do a lot of videos, but in terms of YouTube Live or Facebook Live, I'm very amateur at it, so forgive me. But I've got the YouTube chat. Your shared picture is not clear. All right. It's quite possible that my bandwidth bitrate 4K per second, 4 viewers. Well, I apologize for if I'll check it in a second. Actually, I can hit play on this thing. So I'll see the stream and I'll see what you see. Give me a second here. Error occurred. Oh. Yeah, this part is not clear. What's wrong with that? Oh, the whole thing's not clear. There. Oh, okay, there it is. Looks fine to me. All right. Takes a second to kick in, but Thomas, I hope it clears up for you. But it's I just took a look at it myself, and it seems okay. Okay. So I'm checking on the comments as well. So if you have a comment, you want to ask a question, feel free to go ahead. So the 70-533 exam, as you know, is a big exam. Actually, I just had a person in my my group here share this thing. I mean, I created it, but it's a reminder that out of the 3 exams, the 70-532 has a limited set of topics, but the 70-533 and the 70-535 have almost every topic. Okay, so that's sort of the challenge. So what Microsoft has done is they've broken it up into AZ-100 and AZ-101. Okay, AZ-101 being the other exam. I'm not going to talk about 101 today, and I'm not going to talk about 102. 101 seems like the more advanced exam to me. So this is like security and integration. So we can talk about that on a future live stream. Today we're going to talk about AZ-100. Now, I haven't really prepared a lot of content for you. This is a live stream, and so the idea here, and it's a beta exam, so it's hard to really invest a lot of time and effort into creating video content, edited, all that stuff, because Microsoft can change the exam. So like many people, I've booked one of these exams, and so I've got to brush up on it, and I want to talk about that today. Now, one thing that I noticed right off the bat is that Microsoft is adding new topics on this exam that do not exist on the 533 exam. So the 533 exam does not talk about subscription level resources or resource groups and the like, but basically setting up administrator accounts, configuring cost center quotas, configuring subscription policies, etc. These things are relatively new topics. to the exam at least. Resource utilization, resource construction, analyzing metrics. All this stuff is relatively new. Okay. So I do have my Azure account up here. And so we could go into like assigning administrator permissions. Okay. This would involve essentially creating users on your account. So as a user, I am the administrator of this subscription. Okay. Let's go into complete access details. Funny, Azure now has an IAM panel. That's definitely a term from AWS, right? AWS has their IAM as well. Okay. So we can see here that as a subscription, there is one user, which is just me, the owner. And then there are a number of, service principals. So there's what are these? Resource groups, AZ, Service P. Oh, these are service principals that I've created for various testing things. Okay. So you can see this is pulling in from my Azure Active Directory. So there are users in my Active Directory that I've created. Let's talk about this. John at Cloud Cafe. I could make him, I guess I could give him owner access, which is administrator level privileges. Access to Azure AD group or application. App services, function app, virtual machine. So I can basically assign John Doe administrator permissions using this IAM. And you'll remember I got in here as my permissions. I wonder if there's IAM. See, they have results for it. Subscriptions. So I guess there's multiple ways to get to this, right? So you can go into your subscriptions under all services. You can go into subscriptions and you'll see access control. And I could add, I didn't actually click save, right? So I can add owner permissions to a user that's in my Active Directory, click save. And now I've just upgraded a user as an owner that can access the portal and create the resources the same way that I do. Okay, so these are the types of things. If we go back to the requirements, understanding permissions at the subscription level. Cost is always a big thing. Man, every month I should tell you about this, but I've got my costs down pretty good. I haven't been using my account much this month, and you can see here I'm only running up 19 cents worth of usage. But in prior months, if we go back, you can see that, I'm spending $10, $100, $140. These are usually months where I'm creating a lot of content. I'm creating courses. And so sometimes I need to spend that money to demonstrate to you, to create videos. But sometimes I just forget. Like I leave a VM running and then I think I'll get back to it tomorrow. Like I create a VM and I only get halfway through what I intended to show, and I'll leave it running, and then 3-4 days later I'll come back to it, and I've run up $40 in costs because I just slipped my mind, right? So cost control is a sort of a big area for when you're running cloud accounts. Okay, another example is I just got off the free plan. I have an AWS account. And my free plan just expired last month, and then I got a big bill. And it's like, wait a second, it was running me $0 for so many months, and then suddenly, big bill is relative. It's more than $0 bill, and I had to go in there and I spent 45 minutes looking around to find out what is actually running. So cost control is obviously a big element. So one thing you might want to do is obviously using tags. So if I was to create resources and I knew I was doing it for a particular course, if I was to utilize the tagging mechanism on resources, that could allow me to pinpoint which resources are pulling in the costs. Another thing I saw here, okay, so usage and quotas. I should set a quota for myself, or an alert or something. Let's close that. So you can use up to its quota. Each subscription has separate quotas. And then you request a increase. So for instance, it doesn't really show you here, but like, for virtual machines, I think there's only a 10 CPU quota. That's just by default. But you can see here that I have a quick quota of 50 on my, for virtual networks. For storage accounts, there's a button to request increases. So another requirement here, of course, is subscription policies. See here under subscriptions, under my subscription, there is a policy. Let's see what it does. Select resources to exempt from the policy. Well, let's not exempt any resources. Policy definition. So, audit VMs that do not use managed disks. So you can create basically rules on your account. I want to know which databases do not have transparent data encryption enabled. Or, we're just talking about tags, enforces a required tag and its values, does not apply to resource groups. So I can select the tag policy. I can say that enforce a tag and its value. Name of tag. So this is, I guess this forces tags. Signed by. But how do I assignment display name? So what do I do? Give this so it forces some tags to be onto resources. Nothing wrong with that, I guess. Compliance. And then this will tell me what's compliant and what's not compliant. What other policies do we have here? Subscription, resource group. Oh, I can also do that at the resource group level. That's cool. Let's look at what other policies that they have. So I would say when studying for this exam, I would read through, I would go into here, into subscriptions, policies, and just get a sense of what kind of things that you can use subscription policies to enforce. Audit use of classic virtual machines. So basically, this will stop me from using classic virtual machines. Okay. Apply tag and its default value. Oh, it forces, this is actually better. This forces when you're creating the resource for you to give it a value, and if you don't give it a value, it gets a default value. That's even a better type of rule. Threat detection. So it seems to me that this is good as when you're creating subscriptions and you're using resources. You want to turn on some of these policies. Blob encryption. I thought blob encryption was required. You can't turn off blob encryption. So enforce a tag on its resource groups. Allowed resource types. This will actually disable your organization from creating certain resources. That's interesting too. All right. So basically, worth your time to go into the subscription section of your Azure account and see how you can control costs and how you can have usage quotas or policies, etc. Okay. Now, configure diagnostic settings on resources, create and rest. That's a typo. I think we've been noticing a couple of errors in these things. Well, here's a typo, it seems like. Analyze alerts across subscription. Analyze metrics across subscription. So, we know that we can go into individual resources. So if I go into this web app, we know that there is a metrics. There's a monitoring alerts. Where's the metrics? Monitoring, I guess, is the... But what we want, so this is monitoring. We want is across account. So metric alert classic activity log. So does activity log exist? It exists as a service. So for this requirement, for the resource utilization, there's an activity log service. And so we can see the history, like I just created a new policy assignment, etc. Activity log. So how do I create a new alert? Getting insights into Azure activities using log search and visualization. Sounds good. Select a workspace. Create a new workspace. So AZ-SJD new workspace. All right, put it into a new resource group. I don't know why it's choosing Australia. Pricing. Is there not a free tier? Well, you don't have any choice on that. Okay. So, policy violation. Enforce tag and its value. Well, that's not good. You see, so I can't, because of the policy, and now I can't create a resource. Oh, great. So let's go back to subscription. Let's go back to policies. And let's delete that policy. Thanks, Microsoft. So back to activity groups, to activity log. All right. Log analytics. So this gives you the insight into Azure activities. Create a new workspace, AZ-SJD new work. Create a new workspace. Wants to go in Australia. Now notice there's only 8 locations worldwide that has this log analytics service. This log analytics workspace must be like a storage account because it's pricing it per gigabyte. So it's deploying. Now I should point out Gregor Sati posted in our group, in the Azure user group, there's links to study links, and so I would definitely recommend that if you're looking into now, you know, they're just sort of a collection of links, and so you still have to go through all of these, but there's definitely, this is a good place to start when it comes to studying for these requirements. Okay, so it says successful. My workspace, page to go, that's okay. So I assume Log Analytics now is going to start tracking things that are happening on my account, new deployments, logins, etc., like that. We'll let's look at Azure Log Analytics. Log Analytics. Centralize log data from multiple systems. So you've got virtual machines old and new, Windows and Linux. Transform your Azure activity data across different subscriptions into actionable insights. Customize dashboards. So this is really cool. Microsoft is giving you as an administrator more power into knowing what's going on within your Azure account. I will say that I always found it, whenever I saw that $100 bill, challenging to find which resources were using it. You'd have to click in. It was sort of using even the reports that come with the billing is a bit of a challenge. So turn insights into action with built-in notification and automation. So you can do SMS, email, webhooks, etc. You can even run a DSC script or run some sort of function. That's cool. So please, to use this solution, please connect an Azure subscription. What should be, please connect an Azure subscription, but it should be connected. Let's assume that it's just running right now. Okay, we're going to move on. So, log analytics is in there as well, log search. Manage resource groups. Now, if you've been using Azure for any length of time, especially the ARM model, we've known that everything you do has to be created into a resource group. I've got, I've got like a dozen or 24 resource groups. Now, some of these, they are probably empty, like this one. So I create a resource and then I delete the resource, but I don't delete the group. There should be a tool, a job, something that'll go in and delete empty resource groups. That's probably a missing feature. Or maybe there is something I don't know it. Thanks for doing this. Thank you, AJ. Welcome. So once again, we're doing a live stream. I'm not yet ready to promote this to the courses, to run educational announcements, stuff like that. I'm going to practice my live stream technique here. But we're going to go through, this is the AZ-100 exam. So far, we've gone through the first requirement. We're just going to talk about some of these new things, like when you get into a resource group, they do have locks and things like that. So if I go into locks, this resource has no lock. So I think what ends up happening, let's just look that up. Azure resource group locks. Prevent users from you may need to lock a subscription, a resource group, or a resource. You set the lock level to cannot delete. So let's say that for the key resource, I want to say cannot delete. Why does it say delete? AZ-SJD delete lock. And then you can put a note saying this is important. Don't do it. And so if I go up here and I say delete resource group, it's not stopping me though. Let's go find an empty resource group. Here's an empty resource group. So if I put a lock on this and I say delete lock, I do not want to delete, do not delete. That's a resource group level lock. I guess there's subscription level locks as well. If I go up to here and I say delete resource group and I say let's try to delete, will it let me? The resource group is locked and cannot be deleted. So you see, that's very convenient as well, having locks on resources. Remember a couple of years ago, there was a big Azure, there was an outage on AWS, like the whole east coast of AWS was down, and it was because Azure engineer, Azure, I keep saying Azure, AWS engineer, deleted a bunch of resources, just hit a command, missed out a command line parameter, made a typo essentially, deleted a bunch of resources. So locks are really good for making sure that you're not removing resources accidentally, like you're really intentional. Move resources across resource groups. So in order to move resources across resource groups, let's look at that. You can use the portal. So get subscription. Register a resource provider. You need permissions. Services that can be moved. Services that cannot be moved. This is interesting because I've always thought, you can't move resources, but apparently you can. So get resource, and then move. There's a move PowerShell, and then there's a move command line. Okay, that's to me is interesting. So I'm assuming this is relatively recent. We always thought that you create a resource into a resource group and that's pretty much it. But using PowerShell or using CLI, you can do it, and you can use the portal. Oh wow, let's go look at that. So go into resource. This might be one of the ones that move to another resource group. So there you go. So yeah, that's one of the great things about. Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. It's one of the great things about taking these tests is it forces you to go into the portal and see things that, I've seen this move thing here recently, but I've never opened it, and it never occurred to me that changing from my key RG to creating a new resource group or moving it to a new resource group. I understand the tools and scripts. Yeah, that's fair. So, yeah, they're very interesting stuff here. Okay, so we talked about subscriptions and resources. I'm gonna move on now to remind you that we're going over the AZ-100 exam here, and I really don't have prepared stuff. I'm just going to go through each of these. We'll go into the portal a little bit and examine them. We'll look at the documentation if that's required. This is a beta exam. I can't create content that is permanent yet. Microsoft is going to change this. Once people take the test and they fail certain parts, or they're going to change this again. Okay, so in the next couple months. All right, storage accounts. Configure network access to the storage account. Now, this is one of my favorite newer features, is the service endpoints. So if we go into Azure Portal and we go into storage here, and the storage account's the first quick link under storage, AZ new storage. Yeah, that works. Make sure it's resource manager model. These days I'm creating a V2 storage account. There are some subtle differences between V1 and V2, but we should probably look them up. Actually, V2 has, I think they have the hot and the cold. Yeah, so for one thing, you can save a lot of money by creating cool storage accounts. They're cheaper for storage costs, and it's a little bit more expensive for access costs, etc. But the interesting part, so the requirement here about network access to the storage account, there is this concept of virtual networks. Configure virtual networks. And so instead of having your storage account, remember when I went to create it, it has this fully qualified az-newstorage.core.windows.net. So by default, storage accounts are storage as a service. It's available on the open internet. Now you do need access, and you do need to have the keys or secure access signature, etc. But if that level of security of using keys is not enough for you, you may want to just configure a service endpoint here and basically say that create a new virtual network, AZ new VNet. I'm just going to leave the default settings here. So basically, by creating this storage account attached to a virtual network, only resources with access to this virtual network will have access to the storage account. So the storage account acts like it's a resource on that VNet. It isn't technically, because storage account is managed by Microsoft, but it is basically using firewalls restricted from the open internet and is only to this VNet. Now you could, through network security groups, allow traffic to pass from the open internet into your storage account through NSG, but basically you'd have to configure that. It's not turned on by default. So I'm going to say create. Oh, resource group. All right, new resource group. Create. So this network access is pretty cool. Create and configure storage account. We just did that. Shared access signature. So if you are allowing outside applications, sorry, I'm looking at a comment. Trying to switch from phone to laptop. Yeah, sorry, Stowe. Yeah, hopefully everyone's able to access. We've got, we've got people watching. So, anyways, generate secure access signature, go to resource. Now, by default, again, we just created a storage account. We did attach it to a virtual network that we're going to have to then create a network security group for. But if we wanted to have an application that needed to access the storage account, we might not want to have the access keys to the application hard-coded into the application. The access keys to the storage account hard-coded in the application. And so shared access signatures is a way of restricting access to only individual files, individual dates and times, different file types, or the container level, or only the object level, etc., etc. So basically, it's a connection string that you can generate that you basically give very limited access, and that's the recommended way. Instead of hard coding your access keys into your application, which you can, but instead of doing that, you can actually create a shared access signature. Now, that is the only problem with shared access signatures. Once you've created it, you can't edit it, right? So you can't change your mind later that you want to restrict permissions to this or restrict permissions to that. The access signature's out there. The only thing you can do is you have to invalidate the key. So let's see if it's here, access keys. So the other thing besides shared access signatures is the access, what's it called? Secure access plan or something like that. Okay, so this is just one way of allowing access to your account. You can use access keys, etc. Let's see if they've got support, troubleshooting, metrics. Cool. Now, Azure Storage Explorer. Now, this is relatively new as well, right? When, a couple of years ago, you had to use external applications to, you could upload a file. I guess you can go to your overview, go into your blob. There was oh, that's right. Because I restricted this, your client IP to the firewall exceptions. Interesting. because I restricted this to a virtual network, then I myself don't even get access to it. That's cool. So yeah, let's change this, right? So I'm going to take off the firewall settings, make it back to its default configuration. All networks, including the internet, can access this account. So Storage Explorer is a more sophisticated way of accessing the contents of your storage account now. Look at this, I don't even have a container. So I'd have to go into here, go into Blob, create a container, call it new container, private blob or container. I'll leave it as private. Now we can see there's a container, there's nothing in it. I can now upload, download, open, etc. This Storage Explorer allows me to look inside the storage account in a much better way than the old way, right? So I'm not going to muck around with that. Log analytics, we were just looking at storage replication. Import and export data to Azure. Create export from Azure job. Create import into Azure job. So do we have export and import? Import export jobs. All right, import into Azure. It's SG. Use an existing, so put it into the storage account user group. So we can Azure, let's say Azure import export service. Fast, highly secure, large data migration to the cloud. So transferring large volumes of data over a network can take days, weeks, or months. Right. So Microsoft's also been providing some really interesting options now. So if I looked at the Azure, it's not what's it called? Disk? No, Azure. They have things now, right? So hard not. Identify the data import to blob service. Copy data to your hard drive. So basically, you're preparing your content locally in order to run it as an import-export session. Determine how many hard drives are needed. Run the import job twice to copy the 2 source drives. Wow. So basically you're preparing, putting your data in a particular state in order to import into Azure. Right now I don't have journal files, obviously, so I can't drop off location. Import destination storage account, drop off location. I guess it puts the where you import it into somewhere within your storage account. That makes sense too. Content delivery network endpoints. Azure backup. That's interesting. So Microsoft has been providing this Azure backup service for a while. this allows you to run backups not only of your virtual machines, but of your applications, or maybe your virtual machines that are on your local network, or even of your computer. Okay, so recovery services vaults. I don't actually have any recovery services vaults. AZSG recovery services vault. Create a new one for that. So I'm able to not install the extensions, the VM extensions for my Azure virtual machines that are running in Azure, as well as download the software for my application, for my computer here, to do backups to run into the cloud, as well as any virtual machines that I'm running, local, etc., like that. And so basically, let's go into that resource here. They have a pretty good wizard for where's your workload running. Let's say it's running on premises. What do you want to back up? Depending on what you want to back up, if it's just files and folders, that's basically just a piece of software that can go and copy stuff from your computer, or is it other virtual machines, VMware or Hyper-V, or is it databases, SharePoint, Exchange, or bare metal? Right? Bare metal includes the operating system, obviously. So let's just say files and folders. Now they're basically going to tell me download the agent for Windows or the Windows client, and then I can install it on my computer or on my server. Okay, you get a credential. It has 2 days, so you have to install it and get that set up within 2 days, and then you schedule the backup. And it's basically like a piece of software that you're running on your machine, backing up your computer and uploading it into the Azure Recovery Services Vault. If you were to choose other thing like Hyper-V virtual machines, then you're going to be using something else like System Center. Basically, System Center is what you use to manage all of your servers, including your Hyper-V virtual machines. And so it's actually a different process. If you're talking about your Azure virtual machines, then it's actually, default policy. You're actually choosing your virtual machines, and it's installing a VMware extension, not VMware extension, Azure VM extension, and it'll do the backup according to the schedule. So Azure Recovery Services will manage the backups. Okay, so there's 3 or 4 different scenarios for Azure backup. Okay, so that's as an administrator, that's important. How are we doing on time here? Man, this is running a little long. We're going to skip ahead to the next one. Now, virtual machines. To me, this is obviously should be the most familiar. Creating virtual machines. If you're at all interested in getting certified with Microsoft, you should go in, create Windows and Linux servers again and again and again, and basically get to the point where, based on certain scenarios, you know what to fill out for each thing, what the implications are. AZ-533. So being able to go and create virtual machines again and again is probably trademarked. Oh boy, that's interesting, eh? They don't allow you to use Windows as part of a resource group name? Interesting. Understanding this, this is the way that you save money. So if you have an enterprise subscription with Microsoft, you might be able to save half of the VM cost because you already have a Windows license. I don't, but you can do that. Especially when it comes to virtual machines, one of the key things to understand is the types of virtual machines there are. So general purpose versus all of these compute optimized, memory optimized, storage optimized, GPU, and high performance compute. Why? What scenarios would you want to choose a memory optimized instance type? Okay, this could be something like a database server. This is something that needs to store a lot of stuff in memory. Or in terms of compute, is it doing a lot of calculations? Are there back-end jobs that are running? Not much user interface stuff, not much stuff being stored in memory, but just the CPU needs to be focused. Understand as well that the different classes. So there's like the B class server. To me, that's a pure testing and development. So if you need a B1 is sort of like the bare bones, one CPU, 1 GB of RAM. B2, B4, those are a little bit more powerful, but I wouldn't put them into production workloads. B B1MS, I'm going to select. Why would you choose the D? Why would you choose etc. etc. Going back to the requirements here, ARM templates. Oh man, Microsoft. I'm gonna finish this real quick, but Microsoft loves, in this task specifically, auto shutdown. I'm absolutely, because of my the way that costs work and the way that sometimes this cost me money that I didn't expect. I'm gonna have it shut down for an hour from now. But this is relatively new, actually. This asking to have specific ports enabled. So if you want only the RDP port enabled, or only the SSH port enabled, but not the web ports, that's pretty clever. So I do want the RDP port enabled. It used to be, it defaulted to RDP, and maybe people were getting in trouble having RDP open and not realizing it. So templates. One of the handy things you do is you create resources, and then you can download the ARM template as files, right? So I can say download. Now, just keep in mind, there's more than just the template. There's the parameter file, and there's the scripts. So you're going to want to download at least 3 of them, the template, the parameters, and at least one of the scripting types in order for this to be useful to you. So it's absolutely important that you go into a template file like this, into JSON. I have a video on YouTube, actually, I believe it's on YouTube, talking about template files and the syntax for what's mandatory and what's optional and stuff like that. But getting started by creating a resource and then downloading the JSON template for it is imperative. Reading through this and understanding, as you go through this parameter, the parameter comes in from the parameters file, etc., etc. Okay, so read through this, understand these name value pairs, what they kind of represent. So this is, there's a good piece of work here in terms of understanding a template file, being able to read one without it being all like gobbledygook, and then instead of using the portal, why not use CLI to create these resources using templates? Or why not use CLI to create resources with AZ create VM with the parameters? Just do the scripting directly as well. Okay, so scripting is huge when it comes to the 533 exam, and I assume it's going to be very similar when it comes to here. So create and configure VM for Windows and Linux. That makes pretty much sense. Automate deployments. So that's what we're talking about, is templates. On the one hand, templates, and on the other hand, pure PowerShell. So the Azure PowerShell SDK, downloading that, installing that, practicing with Azure SDK. Where's the PowerShell one? Python, Ruby, command line tools. Okay, so get the Azure PowerShell command line or the Azure command line. The other option for that is Cloud Shell. So you'll see this greater than sign and this underscore. If you start up Cloud Shell, you'll see that this is the command line starting in my browser. So I don't even need to download the thing. I can basically just start to Azure VM list. I don't know if that works. Yeah, I don't have any VMs, right? Azure resource So so basically, being able to run Cloud Shell and then being able to um, do these commands. You see here, I don't even have a reference open, but I kind of have a sense of what Azure Web is, a web app, what the commands are. You can sort of guess at it even, but it's obviously important to have a um, go to a resource, look at the documentation for command line. Now, the other cool thing is PowerShell is an option. So if you're not a huge Linux fan, a huge Bash fan, PowerShell is available to you. But for this exam, you're going to need to know both. Okay, so deployment of VMs, automating, so basically templates, scripts, deploy Windows and Linux VMs, manage VMs. So this is back to scripting, desired state configuration. Okay, VM agent using custom script extensions, manage VM sizes, move VMs from one resource to another. So here we are again. I'm going to close the resource Azure Shell here. Can I just close that? I guess so. If I clicked create, this would take a few minutes to create a resource, but then I have the move, I have the ability to upgrade, and I have the ability to move VMs. Okay. Backups, I just showed you the backup, the recovery vault and the way that you can do Azure backups from there, backup policies, etc., and restoration. Okay, we're coming up to 50 minutes now. I wanted to wrap this up in an hour, so we're going to skip ahead to virtual networks. I will not actually hit create on the resource of the virtual machine. Now, virtual networks are pretty straightforward, I think, as well. If we look into networking, we look into virtual network. We know we have this concept of a total address space. So a virtual network covers an entire address space, and then you subdivide that virtual network into subnets. By default, you always have one subnet, and by default, it's called default, but you can call it whatever you want. Microsoft uses the CIDR notation. So there are CIDR calculators and CIDR cheat sheets on the web, but this, /32, /31, /30, this notation is important for Azure. I believe the largest network you can create is a /8. So let's try that. So I want to create a 10.0.0. So I already have a virtual network, unfortunately, right? Can I do 11? So here I go. I can create with a /8 address space. I am granting myself 16 million IP addresses, private IP addresses. You cannot create 16 million resources in Azure. Azure would not even let you. There's limitations on the subscription level, right? So Azure subscription limitations. I'm pretty sure that the number of resources that you can create on an entire subscription limits, maximum of 10,000 CPUs per subscription. So even if you asked Microsoft, begged and pleaded, you could not get more than 10,000 VMs of one CPU each. Okay, so that's a classic model. Sorry, they always do this. Subscription, 10,000 per region. So 10,000 per region, but there's 50 regions only, so that's 500,000 total resources. And you don't have access to most of those regions. So it's just not possible to get that many resources. But I could, if I wanted to, reserve private IP addresses of a huge range like this. So AZ, huge network. Put that into a new resource group. By default, this is the name default. I have to give it a subnet. Now, you look at the CIDR notation, these 8, 16, and 24 represent these class A, class B, class C. If you know the old style of notation for IP addresses, /24 is basically 256 addresses. Microsoft reserves 5 IP addresses for itself, for its own use, and so it's actually only 251 in the Microsoft world. So if I was to create this huge network and create only one subnet, then I can only use 251 addresses within that network. I'm going to hit create. Okay. So creating virtual networks, pretty straightforward. Subnets, peering. Now, by default, when you create resources on a subnet, all other resources on that same subnet have access to each other. So if you have 2 virtual machines on the default subnet, then those machines can talk to each other. There's no firewall. There's nothing impeding it by default. If you start to create other virtual networks, then these are blocked by default. So a traffic cannot cross a virtual network boundary. There's basically blocked by firewall. So what we need to do is we need to set up a peering arrangement between 2 virtual networks in order for those machines to talk to each other. So that's VNet peering. Configure VNet to VNet. That is a type of security. If we go into the network security group, I don't know why this is. All right. All resources. I created one called network. Huge network. So let's talk about security. You'll see that firewall preview, but the firewall, I was going to say the security on this is through network security group. So subnets. So there's no, it says no network security group by default, but if I go up to the resource group, all resources, let's go into the resource group here. I created a new resource group for the network, right? Well, it's still creating. All right. So go into the subnet there. Let's talk about network security groups. Okay. It says there are no security groups in selected subscription and location. These are them, none. Okay, I have to create one. So network security group is where you handle VNet to VNet connections. So I'm going to go into networking, go there. I want to put it into the same AZ new NSG. Put it into the same resource group that already exists. All right, we are, wow, the hour passed by really quick. So I guess when it comes to this, there's, again, the Microsoft is adding new features, new functionality. We've talked in the last hour about, log analytics is pretty new. We haven't really, I want to dive into this import export a little bit more because it's kind of new for me. But the way that you create networks, why does this keep doing this? So the way that you create service endpoints and you can restrict resources to certain networks, that's all relatively new. So I think for this exam, if you've got any background in Azure, what you want to focus on is the things that are pretty new to you. And the things that are new to you are generally things that are either in preview mode, they're relatively been added. If you're doing everything in the portal, you need to get into scripting. You need to get in PowerShell. You need to get into the bash/CLI. for sure. Create, modify, move stuff from network to network, stuff like that. Be familiar with the syntax such that even if you don't know the exact PowerShell commandlet, you would be able to look at a list of commandlets, and a couple of them would make more sense. The others would not follow Microsoft's naming convention. They're pretty good with PowerShell at sticking to the naming convention. So, well, my dog is up. Too bad we didn't get into the Active Directory stuff. That's also some of the more complicated stuff. Azure has their new domain services, and so being able to create Windows machines, connect them to a domain controller, and make that an Azure domain controller. I'll do that in another video. Okay, synchronizing ADs, etc. So thanks a lot. This has been Scott. I should have said this at the beginning. The landing page for for AZ-100, just Google for it. If this video is useful to you and you want to tune in, you want to see the replay, or you want to see more videos like this talking about Azure, tune into my channel, subscribe, hit like, join the Azure user group on Facebook as well. I will be at Microsoft Ignite in September. This is a beta exam, and I'm expecting the official exam to go live after Ignite. So I'll be at Ignite. I'll be there for the keynotes, and we'll see this go live together. I'm expecting this exam will change between now and then. They'll figure out what they really want to do, fix the typos. But keep that in mind that it's now July, but we're looking at September / into October before this becomes official exam. Oh, this is the A102, which is the 2-in-1. Anyways, I'm going to call it. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Appreciate those that tuned in live. Got to find my software here. Hopefully like I said, I didn't prepare stuff, but I will continue to work on this. And on this channel, you'll continue to see more videos every week relating to Azure, specifically relating to the exams. So if you're looking to get certified, this is the place, and I'm the guy. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it, and take care.